Chapter 1. A Strange Prelude at Baker Street. It was upon a melancholy morning in early November that I once again found myself within the familiar fog-bound streets of London, my way leading instinctively to that modest but remarkable suite of rooms at 2221B Baker Street, which had for so many years been the theatre of my friend's extraordinary triumphs. The grey mist hung low upon the housetops, the pavements were slick with the overnight drizzle, and the lamps still burned faintly in the dim daylight, their reflections trembling in the puddles like half-forgotten memories. My practice had carried me of late into distant parts of the city, and it had been several weeks since I had sat opposite Holmes, with his long thin fingers steepled before his hawk-like face, and the curling blue tendrils of tobacco smoke wreathing his features into that mask of serene abstraction I knew so well, though I had seen him in every conceivable mood, from sardonic laughter to icy contempt. There was ever a peculiar solace in his presence, as if one stood near a lighthouse whose steady beam could pierce the densest of intellectual fogs. When I entered the sitting-room, it was to find him in his dressing-gown, seated cross-legged upon the sofa, his violin lying across his knees. The instrument was silent, yet he seemed to listen intently to some inner harmony, for his head was inclined and his eyes half-closed, as though he heard what no mortal ear could detect. Watson," said he, opening one eye lazily, "you arrive precisely 7 minutes later than I expected. Mrs. Hudson informed me of your letter last evening, and I deduced that your patient in Paddington would detain you somewhat longer than the schedule you had arranged." I laughed. "You astonish me, Holmes. I left Paddington but 20 minutes ago." "And stopped to purchase those carnations in the Strand," he added, pointing to the small bundle I carried. "They are for your wife, I take it, though I fancy she will suspect that you have come here first, judging by the smudge of ink upon your cuff, which suggests you signed the prescription forms in haste." I could only shake my head. You never fail to reduce one's little mysteries to absurd simplicity. Still, I had hoped to surprise you. "Impossible, my dear fellow," he murmured with a faint smile. "Surprise is a condition of the unobservant." He rose then, set his violin aside, and turned to the window, where the mist was gathering thickly upon the panes. For a time he stood thus, motionless save for the faint twitch of his fingers, as though his mind were playing a silent fugue upon invisible strings. "I have been expecting you," he said at last. "I require your medical eye. There is a case coming to us this morning, one which, if my instincts serve, will prove both melancholy and instructive." "A case?" I repeated eagerly. "Then Scotland Yard has summoned you?" "Not directly. A private client. A lady recently widowed. The matter touches upon the death of her husband, a professional musician, drowned 3 nights ago under singular circumstances. His body was recovered yesterday from the Regent's Canal, near Camden Lock. I have reason to believe, however, that the official explanation, accident following intoxication, will not suffice." I noted the faint tightening at the corners of his mouth, that subtle indication of intellectual excitement which no disguise could wholly conceal. "Drowned, you say, and yet not an accident?" "Precisely. The gentleman was a pianist of considerable repute, Mr. Sebastian Linley, formerly of the Philharmonic Society. According to the preliminary report, he had left the theatre after rehearsal, declined a cab, and was not seen alive again. When his body was drawn from the water, his watch had stopped at 11:15. His fingers, however, were curiously unmarked by the usual signs of immersion, a fact which to my mind is of far greater import than the police suspect." Holmes turned sharply as footsteps were heard upon the stair, followed by a discreet knock at the door. "Enter," he called. Mrs. Hudson ushered in a tall, slender woman, whose heavy veil and mourning attire bespoke recent bereavement. Her gloved hands trembled as she held a folded newspaper, the black border of which told its own tale. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes?" she said, her voice low but steady. "My name, madam," Holmes replied, bowing slightly. "Pray be seated. This is my friend and associate, Dr. Watson. You may speak freely before him." She inclined her head. My name is Evelyn Linley. I am the widow of the late Sebastian Linley, whose death you may have read about. I come to you, sir, because I cannot believe my husband's end was the accident the police claim it to be." Holmes regarded her keenly, his grey eyes softening for a brief moment. "You are wise to follow your instincts, Mrs. Linley. The truth often hides behind the mask of accident. Tell us what you know." She drew a deep breath. "Sebastian was no drunkard, Mr. Holmes. He loved the water, it is true. He would walk by the canal to clear his mind after a concert. But he was not reckless. The police found his hat upon the towpath and declared he must have slipped. But his hat—" She faltered, clutching her handkerchief. "His hat was one he never wore on wet nights, and more than that, his music, his composition book, had ears missing. It was always with him." Holmes's eyes flashed. "A composition book. Describe it." "Brown leather tied with a red ribbon. He was working upon a new sonata, one he said would be his finest. The last I heard him play was 2 evenings before his death. It was a strange piece, haunting, unfinished. When I asked what troubled him, he said only, 'There are notes that should never be played aloud.'" A silence fell upon the room. Holmes stood, very still, his expression unreadable. "Notes that should never be played aloud," he repeated softly. "An intriguing phrase. Did he appear fearful when he said this?" "Yes, and distracted. He had quarrelled that afternoon with his patron, Sir Julius Harker, who funded the Philharmonic. I overheard angry words. Something about ownership of the sonata. My husband left shortly after, and that was the last time I saw him alive." Holmes drew a long breath through his nostrils. "Sir Julius Harker, a name not unknown to me. And this quarrel, was it public?" "No, sir, it occurred in our home. Sir Julius was furious, yet he swore he would not let the matter leave the family, whatever that means." "Indeed," said Holmes, resuming his seat. "Mrs. Linley, your husband's body. Did you see it before burial?" She shuddered. "Yes, there was something unnatural about his hands. They were stiff, almost as if he had been gripping something tightly, though nothing was found." "Gripping something invisible," murmured Holmes. "That, too, may prove of consequence." He turned to me abruptly. "Watson, make a note. We shall examine the canal bank at Camden Lock this afternoon. There is more music in that water than the constable suspects." Mrs. Linley rose, gathering her veil. "Then you will help me, Mr. Holmes?" "Madam," he said gravely, "I shall not rest until I have discovered how your husband met his end, and why his music was silenced." As the door closed behind her, Holmes remained motionless for several minutes, his gaze fixed upon the window where the mist pressed thickly against the glass. "A drowned pianist, a missing sonata, and a quarrel with a man of means," he mused. "Watson, I foresee in this case a curious harmony, one composed not of notes, but of motives." He turned suddenly, his eyes alight with that familiar gleam of fire. "Fetch your coat, my dear fellow. The game, as they say, is afoot." Chapter 2. The Canal at Camden Lock. It was 2:30 that afternoon when Holmes and I alighted from a hansom cab upon the narrow bridge spanning Camden Lock, that part of the Regent's Canal which winds, like a sombre ribbon, through the northern quarters of London. The day had grown colder since morning, and a biting wind from the east stirred the water into dull ripples that glistened faintly beneath the leaden sky. Barges lay moored along the embankment. A thin mist of coal smoke and river vapour mingled, lending to the place a peculiar gloom, as though the very air remembered tragedy. Holmes had brought with him his old black walking stick, the one with the silver wolf's head, and strode briskly along the towpath with that long, nervous gait which betrayed the restless activity of his mind. I followed, notebook in hand, for it had long been my habit to chronicle the details of his investigations, though I confess that on this occasion I did so with a certain sense of foreboding. The death of a musician in these murky waters seemed too sad and human, a story to fit easily within the cold arithmetic of Holmes's science. "Observe, Watson," said my companion, halting abruptly near the bend of the canal. "This is the spot where the body was discovered. The constable's report states that it was lodged against that barge yonder, the Emily Rose, sometime near dawn. The current here is sluggish. A man might easily fall in, but less easily drift away. Yet notice. He stooped, examining the damp earth with his magnifying lens, the absence of any fresh footprints near the edge. You perceive only the broad marks of the constable's boots, impressed since the recovery. The bank itself is unusually firm. A man stumbling here would have left traces, however slight. Ergo, Mr. Sebastian Linley did not fall from this point. I knelt beside him. Then he was thrown in elsewhere. Not necessarily thrown, my dear Watson, but transported, perhaps, after death. I stared. You believe he was murdered before he entered the water? Holmes's thin lips curved in that faint smile which always heralded the scent of an intellectual quarry. I believe nothing, yet. But I find it curious that the deceased's hat should be discovered here, while his body was drawn from 20 yards beyond the curve. A hat seldom travels against the current. He moved to the low railing that bordered the towpath, producing from his pocket a small tape measure and notebook. He measured the distance between the posts, the depth of the water, even the angle of descent of the embankment. To the casual eye he might have appeared a surveyor at work, but I knew that beneath his calm precision some mental orchestra was playing furiously. Holmes, I said at last. Mrs. Linley mentioned her husband's missing music book. Could it not simply have been lost in the canal? Holmes straightened, brushing the damp soil from his knees. Lost? Possibly. Yet water does not discriminate. The police recovered his watch, his wallet, even a pencil stub. All perfectly intact. Why should the one item of intellectual value vanish? No, Watson. When an object disappears, it is generally because someone wishes it so. We were joined presently by Inspector Lestrade, whose brisk tread and perpetual air of polite irritation announced him before he spoke. He raised his bowler hat with a perfunctory nod. Good afternoon, Mr. Holmes. I suppose you've come to have a look at our unfortunate musician. Tragic business, but a simple one, I should think. Man comes from rehearsal, takes a stroll by the canal, slips, and... He made a little gesture with his hands. Slips, Inspector? Holmes inquired mildly. And leaves no trace of his fall upon the embankment? Come, you must do better. Lestrade sniffed. We found his walking stick near the path. There's mud on the tip. That's proof. Enough he came near the edge. Besides, the surgeon at St. Pancras says the lungs were full of water. Death by drowning. What more do you want? Holmes's eyes gleamed. The truth, Lestrade, not the convenient summary. Did the surgeon happen to note the condition of the hands? Lestrade frowned. Hands? Well, yes. Stiff, I believe. Natural in cold water. Natural, hardly. Rigor mortis in water, yes, but not such rigidity as to suggest violent contraction before immersion. I should like to see the report. The inspector sighed, extracting a folded paper from his coat. Holmes scanned it rapidly, his brow furrowing. Just as I suspected, he muttered. No mention of any contusion upon the head, though I see a faint bruise was noted at the base of the skull. That bruise, my dear Lestrade, is not the result of a fall into water, but of a blow, deliberate, well-placed, and sufficient to render a man insensible. Your simple drowning, therefore, begins to acquire depth. Lestrade shrugged. You're free to theorize, Mr. Holmes. For my part, I deal with facts. Holmes folded the report neatly and returned it. Indeed, and so do I. Permit me one more. The deceased's watch stopped at exactly 11:15. Yet the constable who first saw the body heard a barge pass this point at that very hour. The Night Swan, bound for Limehouse. The bargee swears he saw nothing in the water. Therefore the body entered the canal after 11:15. How, then, did the watch stop at that time? Either our drowned man's watch is a prophet, or the death occurred elsewhere. For once Lestrade had no ready reply. He muttered something about Holmes and his metaphysics, and retreated toward the bridge, leaving us to our scrutiny. Holmes crouched again, his eyes darting like those of a bird of prey. He traced the rail with his finger, paused, and pointed to a faint smear upon the iron. "Do you see this, Watson?" I leaned closer. A smudge. Rusty brown. Blood, undoubtedly, but old, perhaps 2 nights. Now look beyond. Where the path meets the narrow lane, you perceive the wheel marks. A light carriage, 2 wheels, narrow tread, probably a piano cart. The tracks lead toward the main road. Curious, is it not, that a piano should pass this way on the very night a pianist met his end? Surely coincidence, I ventured. Coincidence, Watson, is the refuge of the unimaginative. Holmes straightened abruptly. Come, let us follow those tracks. We proceeded along the lane until it joined a cobbled street lined with warehouses and timber yards. The wheel marks ended at a gate marked Harker and Sons, musical instrument importers. The sign was faded but legible, and through the slats of the gate we could discern the outline of a small yard filled with wooden crates and discarded packing straw. Holmes gave a low whistle. Sir Julius Harker, again, the very man with whom Linley quarrelled. What say you? Now, Watson, our coincidence begins to sound distinctly melodic. The gate was locked, and no caretaker appeared, so we contented ourselves with a brief survey through the gaps. Holmes stooped, retrieved a thin sliver of wood from the ground, and examined it closely. "Rosewood," he murmured. "Part of a piano casing. Recent. See how cleanly it has split. Watson, the trail grows interesting. It appears that Sir Julius's enterprise deals not only in instruments but in mysteries." He pocketed the fragment and hailed a passing constable to inquire about Harker's premises. The man informed us that no work had been conducted there for several weeks. Sir Julius maintained his business for reputation's sake, but most operations were managed from his residence near St. John's Wood. Holmes thanked him curtly. "Watson," he said as we re-entered our cab, "you may note a pattern forming. A composer quarrels with his patron, vanishes, and is found drowned. The patron owns a warehouse by the canal, where a piano, or something resembling one, was transported on the very night of the death. Add to this a missing manuscript, and we begin to hear the overture of a darker symphony." "And your theory?" I asked. "My theory, Watson, is as yet in rehearsal, but I can tell you this much. Our drowned pianist did not die for money, nor for love. He died for silence, a silence someone was desperate to preserve. He leaned back, eyes half closed, fingers tapping a noiseless rhythm upon his knee. Music, he said softly, is but organized sound. Murder, when done well, is merely its inversion. Chapter 3. Sir Julius Harker of St. John's Wood. The following morning broke cold and bright, with a pale sun glimmering through the haze that hovered above the city roofs. Holmes was already astir when I came down to breakfast, his long dressing gown sweeping the floor like a scholar's robe, and his violin lying open upon the table beside the remnants of an untouched meal. He greeted me only with a brief nod, his eyes distant and abstracted. "Good morning, Watson," he said without looking up. "I trust you slept well. I, on the other hand, have spent half the night examining the geometry of that canal and the probability of waterborne deception." "You mean to say you've been awake since we returned?" "Indeed. The mind, when it catches scent of a mystery, knows no fatigue. I have been composing certain hypotheses, musical, geographical, and criminal. And now," he added, closing his notebook with a snap, "we shall put them to the test. Sir Julius Harker has invited us, or rather I have invited myself, to breakfast at his residence in St. John's Wood." "You intend to confront him directly?" Holmes smiled thinly. "My dear Watson, I never confront a man until I know the shape of his lies. I shall merely observe him, and perhaps, if fortune favours, let him observe me." By 11 o'clock we were en route through the winding avenues of St. John's Wood, our cab wheels crunching upon the gravel drives of that genteel suburb. Sir Julius Harker's house, Rosemere Lodge, stood somewhat apart from its neighbours, a stately Georgian structure of pale stone with ivy climbing the columns and a pair of stone lions guarding the gate. Even before we entered, I felt something austere and watchful in its air, as though the place itself kept secrets. A servant in sober livery admitted us into a spacious hall adorned with musical trophies, portraits of composers, gilded lyres, and framed scores under glass. The faint scent of varnish and old parchment pervaded the air. "Sir Julius will attend you shortly," the man said, and withdrew. Holmes's keen eyes roamed across the room. "A man who decorates his walls with the genius of others," he murmured. "Interesting." We were soon joined by Sir Julius himself, a tall, broad-shouldered man in his late 50s, his once black hair streaked with iron grey, and his manner one of cool authority. His eyes, dark and intelligent, surveyed us with a mixture of curiosity and irritation. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes," he said, extending a hand of surprising strength, "and Dr. Watson, if I mistake not. You are both, I believe, inquiring into the regrettable death of my protégé, Sebastian Linley." "Regrettable indeed," Holmes replied. "Your name, Sir Julius, was mentioned by Mrs. Linley as her husband's patron and friend." He inclined his head. "Friend, yes. Though lately, I fear, not an agreeable one. Artists, Mr. Holmes, are delicate creatures, prone to fancy and resentment. Linley imagined himself ill-used because I required a share of the rights to his new sonata. I had, after all, advanced him a considerable sum for its composition." "And you last saw him?" "2 evenings before his death," said Harker, his face hardening. "We quarrelled, I admit. Words were spoken that might have been better left unsaid. Yet I would not harm the man. He was of value to me, both commercially and sentimentally." Holmes seated himself opposite the great man, steepling his fingers. "You speak of value, Sir Julius, as one might of an investment." Harker's lip curled. "Call it what you will. Art, Mr. Holmes, requires patrons. Without men such as myself, genius would starve in garrets. Linley was a genius, though a capricious one. His final sonata, the Nocturne in E minor, he called it, possessed certain qualities I cannot describe. It affected the listener. Strangely, even now I can hear its final bars in my mind." "You have the manuscript, then?" Holmes asked quickly. "I did," replied Harker, "but it has vanished. When I sent to Linley's rooms after his death, the score could not be found." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Then it was indeed stolen." Harker hesitated, then said, "I do not say so. Perhaps he destroyed it himself. There was something unhealthy in that music. He grew pale and nervous while writing it, as though haunted by the very sounds he created." At this, Holmes's gaze sharpened with sudden interest. "Unhealthy, you say? Pray elaborate." Sir Julius shifted in his chair. "The sonata contained passages, discordant, jarring, almost unnatural. He claimed to hear harmonies beyond the range of human pitch, tones that lingered in the mind long after the ear had ceased to perceive them. At first I thought him fanciful, but when he played it for me, I confess I felt an odd sensation, a pressure upon the temples, as though the air itself vibrated with something unseen." Holmes sat perfectly still. "And you heard this performance on the very evening you quarrelled?" "Yes. He refused to repeat it for the Philharmonic, saying it was unfinished." "Foolish sentimentality. A composition is nothing without an audience. I insisted he publish it under our joint names. He refused, became violent, and left. That was the last I saw of him." There was a pause. Holmes rose and began to wander slowly about the room, his eyes noting every object: a grand piano polished to mirror sheen, a rack of music folios, and upon a side table a photograph of a woman in evening dress. "Your daughter?" he asked, glancing at it. Harker stiffened slightly. "Yes. Miss Clara Harker. She assists me in my affairs and is herself a pianist of some promise." Holmes inclined his head. "Does she share your admiration for Mr. Linley's genius?" A faint colour rose in the older man's cheeks. "Clara is young and impressionable. She was fond of him, I think, as any artist might be of one who inspired her. But that is no concern of yours." "On the contrary," said Holmes softly, "human affections often provide the harmony beneath which crime writes its darker themes." Before Harker could reply, the door opened and a young lady entered. She was tall and graceful, with a delicate, serious face and eyes of clear grey. Her morning dress was plain but elegant, and there was a subdued dignity in her manner that instantly commanded respect. "Father," she said quietly, "I was not aware you had visitors." "Mr. Sherlock Holmes, Miss Harker," he said shortly. "He is investigating Mr. Linley's death." She turned to Holmes, her expression one of both curiosity and apprehension. "Then you, sir, do not believe it was an accident?" "I seldom believe in accidents," Holmes answered. "They are too often the refuge of the unimaginative, a phrase which, I fear, I repeat to excess." A faint smile touched her lips. "Then I am glad you have come. My father dismisses my fears, but I am convinced Mr. Linley's death was no mere misstep. He was afraid, dreadfully afraid, before he died." Harker frowned. "Clara!" But the girl pressed on, her voice trembling. "He came to me 2 nights before his death. He said there was something in his music, something he had uncovered, that others would kill to possess. He begged me to keep away from the canal, from the warehouse, from—" She broke off suddenly, glancing at her father. "From what?" Holmes asked gently. Her lips parted, but before she could answer, Sir Julius rose abruptly. "That will do, Clara. Mr. Holmes, my daughter is overwrought. I will not have her distress revived by morbid imaginings." Holmes's eyes moved swiftly between them, noting the tremor in the girl's hands and the rigidity of her father's jaw. "As you wish, Sir Julius. I shall not press her. For now." We took our leave shortly after. As our cab rattled away down the tree-lined road, I turned to Holmes. "Well, what do you make of them?" He smiled faintly. "Sir Julius Harker is a man of intellect, but no imagination, which makes him dangerous. His daughter, on the other hand, has imagination but no guile. Between them lies our drowned pianist, and a sonata which, if ever I hear it, may explain all." "And what do you propose next?" Holmes tapped his fingers thoughtfully. "To pay a visit to the late Mr. Linley's rooms in Bloomsbury. If the manuscript is truly missing, perhaps it left behind its shadow." He settled back against the seat, his expression one of deep satisfaction. "Watson," he murmured, "we are listening to a symphony of deceit, and we have only just heard the overture." Chapter 4. The Silent Room in Bloomsbury. The afternoon was already waning when Holmes and I arrived in Bloomsbury, that old and somewhat shabby quarter of London which seems perpetually scented with dust, ink, and the ghosts of scholars. Mr. Sebastian Linley had occupied rooms on the upper floor of a narrow house in Keppel Street, overlooking the long row of plane trees that divided the pavement. A faint drizzle had begun to fall, soft as the whisper of paper against glass, and the gas lamps were being lit one by one as we mounted the stairs. A melancholy hush pervaded the place. The landlady, Mrs. Griggs, a nervous little woman with red eyes and a perpetual motion of the hands, received us with a mixture of curiosity and fear. Holmes produced his card, and the authority of his name was sufficient to dispel whatever hesitation she might have felt. "You was sent by the lady, sir? Mrs. Linley?" she asked, clutching her apron. "By Mrs. Linley, yes," Holmes replied smoothly. "We wish to examine Mr. Linley's rooms exactly as he left them. You will oblige us by seeing that no one enters during our visit." "Oh, no one's been up since the constable sealed it, sir," she assured him. "It fair gives me the creeps. That room does. He'd sit at his piano for hours, he would, playing them queer bits of music till my very bones ached. And that last week, Lord help us. There was such a sound one night, like wind through a keyhole. I says to him next morning, 'Mr. Linley, you'll have the neighbours complaining.' But he just smiled that pale smile of his and says, 'Not wind, Mrs. Griggs, just the air remembering.'" Holmes's eyes gleamed. "The air remembering. A curious expression. Thank you, Mrs. Griggs. You may wait below." He took the small brass key she offered and opened the door to the late musician's chamber. The room was neat but singularly bare. A narrow iron bed stood in one corner, opposite a writing desk piled with manuscript paper. Against the far wall, beneath the single window, rested a grand piano, its lid half raised, as though the owner had only stepped away between movements. Dust had gathered upon its surface, and a faint chill hung in the air, the particular stillness that lingers in places where music once lived. Holmes stood motionless upon the threshold for a long moment. "Do you feel it, Watson?" he said quietly. "An atmosphere is as eloquent as a witness. This room speaks of intellect under strain, and of fear." I looked about. The walls were lined with books of musical theory, treatises in German and French, and a few scattered journals. Upon the desk lay pins, a tuning fork, and a small metronome frozen mid-swing. Yet what most caught my attention was a torn scrap of parchment pinned beneath a paperweight. Holmes was there before me. He lifted the weight delicately and examined the fragment under his lens. "Music notation," he murmured, "but incomplete. A single measure only. Observe these notes, Watson. EFEB repeated twice, then abruptly cut off. And here? The ink is smudged as though by a trembling hand." I peered closer. "A theme from the missing sonata, perhaps?" "Undoubtedly. But more than that. A message. This configuration of notes is not merely musical. It forms, when interpreted through cipher, the letters H-A-R-K, the opening of Harker. You perceive? Our composer may have left a dying clue." I was astonished. "You mean Linley foresaw his fate?" "It is possible. An artist may express through symbols what fear prevents him from speaking aloud. Let us look further." Holmes proceeded to the piano. With infinite care he lifted the lid and examined the keys. A faint discoloration marked the ivory beneath the middle octave. He struck one key lightly. It gave forth a dull, almost metallic tone. "Out of tune," he observed. "Yet not from neglect. Someone has tampered with the strings." He fetched from his pocket a small screwdriver, one of those curious instruments he kept for the most unlikely contingencies, and gently removed the front panel of the piano. What lay within caused him to utter a low whistle. Between the taut wires, folded neatly and secured by twine, was a sealed envelope. Holmes extracted it and read aloud the inscription: "To be delivered only if harm befalls me, S. Linley." The seal bore the impression of a treble clef. "By Jove!" I exclaimed. "He hid his letter inside the piano itself." "Where else, Watson, would a musician conceal his testament but in the heart of his instrument? Now let us see what confession our drowned man has left." Holmes broke the seal carefully and unfolded the letter. The handwriting was firm but hurried. "If this should reach the hands of anyone who seeks truth, let it be known that I, Sebastian Linley, am followed and in peril. My patron, Sir Julius Harker, covets my composition, not for its art, but for what it contains. I have discovered in the resonance of certain chords a vibration beyond ordinary sound, one that affects the mind and nerves. Harker calls it the frequency of obedience. He would use it to command men as one commands a dog by whistle. I will not let my work become such an instrument. If I am found dead, it will be by his hand or that of his agents. The sonata, the nocturne in A minor, lies hidden where only the drowned may hear it." The letter ended there. For several seconds neither of us spoke. Outside, the rain pattered against the window pane like fingers tapping upon glass. "Good Lord," I murmured. "Do you believe this, Holmes? A frequency of obedience. Surely it is madness." Holmes folded the letter and placed it inside his breast pocket. "Madness, perhaps, but even madness may hold method. The science of acoustics is young, and there are phenomena not yet measured by human instrument. If Linley stumbled upon some vibration capable of affecting emotion or equilibrium, it would indeed tempt a man like Harker, whose ambition outstrips his conscience." He moved to the window, parting the curtain slightly. "Note, Watson, the view. Directly opposite stands a warehouse with a narrow lane leading toward the canal. I believe that to be part of Harker's property. It would have been a simple matter for his men to transport the body under cover of night." At that instant a faint creak sounded from the landing. Holmes's head turned sharply. He crossed the room in 2 silent strides and flung open the door, but the passage was empty. "Someone has been listening," he said softly. "You observed perhaps the movement of that shadow across the threshold." "I saw nothing." "Then your eyes, my dear Watson, are not yet tuned to pianissimo observation." He smiled faintly. "No matter. We shall depart by the rear stair. Our unseen friend will find the bait gone from the trap." Before leaving, Holmes replaced the piano panel precisely as he had found it, leaving no trace of disturbance. Downstairs, Mrs. Griggs emerged from her parlor, twisting her hands nervously. "Was everything in order, sir?" "Perfectly," Holmes replied, "though I should advise you to keep your door locked after dark. There may be those who mistake curiosity for safety." Her eyes widened, but he offered no further explanation. We stepped out into the drizzle, where our cab awaited. Once inside, I could restrain myself no longer. "Oh, Holmes, this is the most extraordinary affair. You surely do not credit this wild theory of hypnotic music." He smiled in that infuriatingly serene fashion of his. "Watson, I credit nothing until it is proved. Yet I have learned that what the world calls impossible is often merely premature. Remember the telephone, the gramophone, the X-ray. Why not a vibration that moves not the body but the mind?" I shook my head. "Then what now?" He tapped the pocket where the letter lay. "Now, my dear fellow, we listen more closely. Linley's words tell us the sonata lies where only the drowned may hear it. I take that to mean beneath water, perhaps within the canal itself. If so, our next visit will not be to a drawing-room, but to a dive." He leaned back, his eyes glittering. "Tonight, Watson, we return to Camden Lock. Bring your revolver, and your thickest boots. The drowned pianist may yet have something to say." Chapter 5. Voices Beneath the Water. It was near midnight when Holmes and I found ourselves once more by the Camden Lock, the same grim stretch of canal where poor Sebastian Linley's body had been discovered. A pale mist hung over the black water like a living thing, shifting and coiling in the chill breeze that came whispering from the north. The gas lamps along the towpath threw long, quivering reflections, and from some distant tavern there floated the faint, melancholy strains of a concertina. Holmes, wrapped in his greatcoat and with his collar turned high, moved noiselessly beside me. His lantern, hooded to a narrow beam, swung in his hand, illuminating the cobbles only by fits and starts. No sound came from the warehouses that loomed on either side, only the slow, rhythmic creak of a barge moored farther down, rocking gently in the current. "It is precisely as I expected, Watson," Holmes murmured. "Observe the stillness. The night itself seems to hold its breath." "You believe we shall find something beneath the surface?" I asked, trying to mask the unease that crept over me. "I believe," said he, "that the late Mr. Linley was a man of literal habits. When he wrote that his sonata lies where only the drowned may hear it, I do not think he spoke in metaphor. There is something hidden below this water, something he meant us to find." He paused beside a pile of old timber, dropped his lantern's beam upon the ground, and knelt. There, half buried in mud and silt, was the faint impression of wheels, a barrow or handcart perhaps, and the scuffed tracks of heavy boots leading to the canal's edge. "Recent?" Holmes said. "Within the last 2 nights, I should judge. The weight pressed deeply, the load was heavy, but the tread firm. 1 man, possibly 2. He drew from his pocket a small steel probe and thrust it delicately into the mud. After several moments he struck something hard. With a low exclamation he began scraping away the soil until the shape of a wooden crate came into view, its edges worn and water-darkened. Holmes cast me a quick glance. "The drowned man's secret, Watson. Give me a hand." Together we hauled the crate from the water's edge. It was no small labor, for it was sodden and heavy. Once upon the path, Holmes pried it open with the blade of his clasp knife. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, lay a bundle of papers and what appeared to be a flat metal case, tarnished but intact. Holmes opened the case first. Within, cushioned in velvet, rested a cylinder of polished steel, not unlike the phonographic reels Mr. Edison had recently popularized. A faint smell of oil and seaweed rose from it. "A recording device," said Holmes, eyes bright. "Remarkable. Our composer may have left us his voice." He examined the bundle of papers next. They proved to be the complete score of Linley's unfinished work, the Nocturne in E minor. The final page bore a scrawled note, "To be played in the key of silence. The truth is heard when all else ceases." Holmes studied this for a moment, his brow furrowed. "Played in the key of silence," he murmured. "A paradox worthy of a philosopher, or a madman. Yet, Watson, music rests upon mathematics, and mathematics upon truth. There may be something here beyond poetry." Before I could reply, a faint splash broke the quiet behind us. We both turned sharply. Something, or someone, was moving in the fog. Holmes extinguished his lantern at once. "Down, Watson!" he hissed. We crouched behind the crate as a shadowy figure emerged upon the towpath. The man was tall and broad-shouldered, wrapped in a long coat, his hat pulled low. He paused by the water's edge, peering about, then stooped and examined the ground, where our footprints were freshly pressed into the mud. Holmes's hand found my sleeve, and I felt the cold steel of my revolver pressed into my palm. "If he moves toward us," he whispered, "aim low. I prefer answers to obituaries." For several long seconds the figure stood motionless. Then, evidently satisfied that what he sought was gone, he turned and melted into the fog, heading toward the warehouse. Holmes waited until the footsteps had faded before rising. "As I suspected, we are not the only ones interested in Linley's legacy." "Do you think it was Harker himself?" Holmes shook his head. "Harker would not soil his boots in mud. More likely an agent, perhaps one who now realizes the crate is missing. We must depart before he returns with company." We carried our prize to the waiting cab, Holmes insisting on placing the crate between us on the seat. Once we were safely on the road toward Baker Street, he unlatched the case again, holding the steel cylinder up to the light of the cab lamp. "This is no ordinary phonograph reel," he said. "Note the fine etching along its rim. Not English workmanship. German, I should say, and recent. There were rumors of an engineer in Leipzig experimenting with subsonic harmonics, sounds below the threshold of hearing. If Linley worked with him, this device may contain tones designed to affect the nervous system itself." I shuddered. "You mean the so-called frequency of obedience?" Holmes gave a grim smile. "Let us reserve judgment, but if this cylinder can influence the mind, even to a small degree, we hold in our hands a discovery as dangerous as any explosive." When we reached Baker Street, Mrs. Hudson, still awake and mildly scandalized by our late hour, admitted us with much clucking and protest. Holmes brushed past her, carrying the cylinder as one might a volatile specimen. In the sitting room he set the object upon the table and turned up the gaslight. "Now, Watson, we shall see what sort of music the dead have left us." He fetched from his shelf an Edison phonograph, a recent gift from a client in New York, and with deft fingers adjusted the cylinder to fit. "Stand ready," he said, winding the crank. The first sounds were faint, a low hum, not unpleasant, rising and falling like the echo of wind in a cavern. Then came a tone, pure and steady, that seemed to vibrate not only in the ear but somewhere deep within the chest. The room itself appeared to quiver. The flame of the gas lamp flickered wildly, though there was no draught. "Good heavens," I murmured. "Do you hear that resonance?" Holmes did not answer. His eyes were fixed upon the phonograph, his expression rigid. The sound grew stranger, layered now with faint harmonics, elusive and disquieting like the whisper of voices under water. I felt a sudden vertigo, a pressure in my skull as though the air itself had grown heavy. Then abruptly the tone ceased. Holmes exhaled sharply and reached to stop the machine. His hand trembled slightly. "Extraordinary," he said hoarsely. "You felt it too, Watson?" "Yes." "As if my very heartbeat had altered." He nodded. "Linley was no madman. He had found a vibration capable of affecting the human nervous system. The question is, did he use it merely for art or for control? Before I could reply, there came a sharp knock at the door below. 3 rapid raps, then silence. Holmes stiffened. At this hour? We waited. The knock came again, louder this time, and followed by the distinct sound of a key scraping in the lock. Holmes blew out the lamp. Someone has obtained entry. Quick, Watson. Into the bedroom. We slipped into the adjoining room just as the sitting room door swung open. Through the narrow crack I saw the flicker of a lantern and the silhouette of a man entering cautiously. He moved straight to the table, toward the cylinder. Holmes leaned close to my ear and whispered, "Our visitor returns for the music. Steady now." The intruder's gloved hand reached out, and in that instant Holmes sprang. The struggle was brief but furious. I rushed to assist, grappling the fellow's arm as he tried to break free. His lantern fell and shattered, plunging us into darkness save for the glow of the dying coals. Holmes twisted. There was a cry of pain, and the man collapsed. When we struck a light, our captive lay pinned against the hearthrug. His hat had fallen away, revealing a pale, hawk-like face I knew at once. It was Sir Julius Harker. Holmes rose slowly, eyes cold. "Good evening, Sir Julius. You have come far from Bloomsbury to retrieve what you call yours. Perhaps you will stay to explain why a gentleman of your position prowls Baker Street at midnight in search of a dead man's music." Harker glared up at him, breathing hard. "You meddle in matters beyond you, Holmes. That composition is mine by right, and if you value your life, you will hand it over." Holmes regarded him for a long moment, then said quietly, "You mistake the key, Sir Julius. It is not obedience I hear in this music, but guilt." Chapter 6. The Frequency of Obedience. The dawn crept grey and reluctant through the windows of Baker Street when Holmes at last ordered the fire to be stoked and the curtains drawn. Sir Julius Harker, pale and haggard, sat bound to the armchair near the hearth. His immaculate cravat hung askew, and his fine gloves, now torn, lay upon the carpet beside him. The proud mask of the politician had slipped, revealing beneath it a cold, calculating fear. I confess I felt a grim satisfaction. Few intruders in our rooms had deserved their capture more thoroughly. Holmes, meanwhile, stood before the fire, hands clasped behind his back, the glow illuminating the sharp lines of his face. His grey eyes burned with that peculiar brilliance I had come to know, the look of a mind hovering on the edge of revelation. "You have some nerve, Sir Julius," Holmes began quietly, "to break into my rooms at so ungentlemanly an hour, without even the courtesy of a calling card." Harker sneered. "You leave me no choice. That cylinder contains private research, state research. You endanger not only yourself, but the peace of this country." Holmes inclined his head slightly. "How reassuring to know that burglary is among the duties of public service." The man shifted in his seat, his composure visibly fraying. "You have no notion what forces you meddle with, Holmes. I have the backing of the Home Office. If you persist, I shall see to it that neither you nor your pet doctor here ever set foot in England again." I felt my cheeks flush at the insult, but Holmes raised a hand to still me. "Let us avoid empty threats, Sir Julius. They ring as hollow as your conscience. You will enlighten us, or I shall place the matter in Inspector Lestrade's capable hands. He is at least punctual, if not brilliant." At the mention of Lestrade, Harker's defiance wavered. His eyes darted toward the phonograph, still resting upon the table like a silent witness. When he spoke again, his voice had softened, though the bitterness remained. "You truly do not understand, Holmes. The device, Linley's invention, is capable of manipulating the very rhythms of the human brain. Certain frequencies can induce obedience, fear, even ecstasy. The ministry commissioned him to explore these phenomena for crowd control, a pacification system for riots, uprisings, anything threatening the crown's stability." I started. "Good heavens! You mean to say this music can control men's minds?" "Not directly. said Harker with a weary sigh. But it alters the body's responses, makes men pliant, suggestible. The effect is temporary but powerful. Linley perfected it. He called it the frequency of obedience. But he was a fool. He wanted to reveal it publicly, claimed it would bring peace through harmony. Peace. He spat the word. He would have handed the Empire's greatest weapon to the newspapers. Holmes's face had grown still as marble. And so you silenced him. Harker gave a cold smile. You cannot prove that. No? Holmes paced slowly before the hearth. The night Linley died, he was last seen leaving your club in Pall Mall. You dined together, ostensibly to discuss the premiere of his sonata. Yet he was found the next morning in the canal, his lungs full of water, his skull bruised, but no sign of struggle upon his hands. Drowned, yes, but not from panic. A man in a trance, perhaps? Submerged willingly. Harker's mouth twitched, betraying the faintest tremor of alarm. Holmes went on, his voice a scalpel. You had already weaponized his music, had you not? You played upon him the very frequency he designed, turning his own art into his undoing. Under its spell, he walked to his death as peacefully as a child to bed. The politician's eyes blazed. You cannot imagine the stakes, Holmes. Nations rise and fall upon such discoveries. I acted for the greater good. Holmes's tone sharpened. The greater good is the first refuge of those who covet power. For a long moment only the hiss of the fire broke the silence. Then Harker laughed, a low, mirthless sound. You think yourself clever, but you've no evidence admissible in any court. The music, the machine, all of it will be seized by the government before you can draw breath. Indeed, said Holmes mildly. Yet I find it curious that a man so certain of official protection should creep into Baker Street in the dead of night rather than simply request the return of government property. At this, Harker's composure finally fractured. He slumped forward, the arrogance drained from him. You don't understand, he muttered. There are others, men higher than I. They want it gone. The experiment failed. Holmes's gaze sharpened. Failed? In what sense? Harker looked up, and in that instant I saw genuine fear in his eyes. Linley altered the formula in secret. He said he'd found the perfect resonance, a tone that could calm any mind. But when we tested, God help us, it did the opposite. Those who heard it turned upon one another. Some tore at their own flesh, others simply stopped. Stopped? I repeated faintly. Breathing, Harker whispered. A chill ran down my spine. Holmes was silent for several seconds, then said softly, So Linley's music was not obedience, but annihilation. Harker gave a hollow nod. He realized too late what he'd done. When he threatened to expose us, we had to act. Holmes turned to me. Watson, do you recall the sensation we experienced last night when the cylinder played? The weight in the chest, the disturbance of rhythm. That was but a fragment of its potency. Amplified or played in its entirety, it could indeed kill. I felt my stomach turn. Then, Holmes, we are sitting upon a weapon more deadly than dynamite. Holmes regarded the cylinder with grim fascination. Precisely, and one infinitely more subtle. He moved suddenly, taking the cylinder from the phonograph and sealing it in a metal box. Then he turned back to Harker. Sir Julius, he said quietly, you will remain here until morning. Then we shall escort you to Scotland Yard, where you will make a full statement. If your superiors wish to intervene, they may do so publicly. Harker's expression darkened. You think you can stop them? You've no idea who... Enough, said Holmes sharply. Watson, kindly fetch Lestrade at once. I hastened to comply, though my heart pounded. By the time I returned an hour later with the inspector, the room bore signs of a brief struggle. The chair stood overturned, the ropes cut cleanly through. The window gaped open to the morning fog. Holmes stood by the sill, calm but pale. Our guest, he said, has chosen the coward's path. A carriage was heard departing not 10 minutes ago. Lestrade swore under his breath. We'll have the ports watched. He can't get far. Holmes gave a faint, ironic smile. Do not underestimate the power of those who trade in obedience, Lestrade. They have ears in every corridor of Whitehall. The inspector frowned. And what of the thing itself? Holmes gestured to the sealed box on the mantelpiece. Safe for now. But it must not fall into any government vault. Its value lies not in use, but in suppression. Lestrade scratched his head. You mean to destroy it? Not yet, said Holmes. There remains one piece of the puzzle, the true motive of Linley's death. Was it truly silencing, or was there another hand guiding Harker's actions? He looked toward the window, where the fog thickened like a shroud. Until that is answered, Watson, we are still in the dark. Chapter 8. The Vault Beneath the Lock. That evening the city seemed to hold its breath. A fine drizzle had begun again, settling over the streets with a sound like soft sighing. Holmes and I arrived at Camden Lock as darkness fell, the fog curling over the canal, like smoke from some unseen forge. The lamps cast pale circles of light across the water, but here and there the mist closed them down to nothing. Holmes moved with his usual silence, carrying under one arm the sealed metal case containing Linley's cylinder, and under the other a stout coil of rope. I followed with the tools Carraway had advised, a small grapnel, waterproof lanterns, and a diving hook. Our expedition was not undertaken lightly. Even Holmes admitted that this venture was perilous. At the water's edge, Carraway was waiting for us. He wore a thick oilskin coat, and his spectacles glistened in the lantern light. He led us toward a small iron hatch concealed beneath an old mooring platform. The wood around it was slick and moss-covered, the hinges rusted by years of water and neglect. "This," said Carraway in a whisper, "is the entrance." Linley referred to it in one of his journals, though he called it the silent chamber. He designed it as a sanctuary for his final composition. Holmes crouched beside the hatch, examining it closely. "Remarkable," he murmured. "The craftsmanship is precise. Whoever built this did so with intent and secrecy." He produced a key from his pocket, a slender piece of brass he had carried with him since our first visit to Bloomsbury, and fitted it into the lock. The mechanism gave a soft click, and the hatch swung open with a creak that seemed too loud for such a small opening. A ladder descended into the darkness. The air was heavy and damp, and a faint metallic scent drifted upward. Holmes handed me the lantern. "We proceed with caution, Watson. This is no ordinary cellar." We descended one by one. My boots splashed faintly against the water pooled upon the first steps. The air grew colder, more oppressive. Holmes led the way, his own lantern throwing dancing light upon the walls of brick and iron. At the bottom we found ourselves in a circular chamber, perhaps 20 feet in diameter. The walls were lined with thick metal plates, riveted as if to withstand pressure. At its center stood a stone pedestal, upon which rested a wooden case, far older and more worn than the one Holmes carried. Around the pedestal ran a narrow channel filled with water, fed by a small pump that still whispered faintly. "This," Carraway said softly, "is the heart of Linley's design." Holmes stepped forward, his eyes scanning the chamber. "Observe, Watson, the construction. This is not merely a storehouse, it is an acoustic resonator. The very shape of this vault would amplify certain frequencies while deadening others. It is a deliberate chamber for sound, Linley's ultimate laboratory." Carraway hesitated, glancing toward the pedestal. "Inside that case lies the complete sonata. Linley wrote that it should be performed here, beneath the water. Not to conceal it, but to complete it." Holmes studied the box as if it were an unopened puzzle. "A submerged performance," he murmured. "And not merely art, but experiment." He wished to test his theory in situ, under conditions no concert hall could reproduce. I could not keep the question from my lips. "But Holmes, what became of Linley? Did the chamber claim him?" Holmes did not answer at once. His fingers traced the grooves upon the box as though reading a hidden inscription. Then he looked at Carraway sharply. "Explain, if you would, Mr. Carraway, why you did not reveal this to Scotland Yard." Carraway's voice was low. Because I feared they would destroy it. The frequency is dangerous, Dr. Watson. Not because it compels obedience in the simple sense, but because it alters the will itself. Linley spoke of it as a force beyond legislation or reason, and Harker wished to weaponize it. Holmes nodded slowly, which is why Harker was desperate to obtain it, and which is why he would have silenced Linley. He turned to me, his voice now firm. Watson, we are here because the case has reached its critical movement. What we find in this vault will decide whether we possess a treasure of music or a weapon of doom. He moved to the pedestal and carefully lifted the wooden case. The air seemed to grow still, and the hush of the chamber pressed upon us like a living weight. Holmes placed the case upon the stone and with deliberate care undid the clasps. Inside lay a bundle of manuscripts, sealed rolls of parchment, and beneath them another cylinder of steel, larger than the one we had recovered from the canal. Its surface was etched with fine characters and musical notation, more intricate than anything I had ever seen. The metal seemed to pulse faintly in the light. Holmes picked up the cylinder with reverence. "This," he said, "is the complete sonata, and this chamber, this silent room, is its intended instrument." Carraway swallowed audibly. The music was not intended for concert halls. It was designed to be a demonstration of the principle itself. Played here, beneath water, it would produce a sound at a frequency capable of reaching the unconscious mind directly. Holmes nodded gravely. "And if the wrong ears hear it, Mr. Carraway, the consequences could be incalculable." We stood in silence for a long moment. Outside, the muffled noise of the city drifted down the ladder shaft. Beneath our feet, the water murmured softly, as though whispering secrets no man should hear. Then Holmes placed the cylinder back in the case. "We must remove this entire apparatus," he said. "It cannot remain here, nor can it be allowed to fall into any hand, however honorable they claim to be. The world is not ready for such a power." Carraway nodded. "And Sir Julius? If he survives, he will return for it." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Then we must be swifter." He turned to me. "Watson, tonight we return to Baker Street, but before another hour has passed, I will arrange for this chamber to be sealed. Permanently. That will require certain precautions, and a certain degree of secrecy." I felt a chill of apprehension, yet also a certain grim satisfaction. We had ventured into the depths of mystery, and for the first time I sensed the shape of its resolution. Yet in Holmes's eyes there remained a shadow, an acknowledgement that the case was far from complete. As we climbed back toward the street, Carraway cast one last glance into the chamber. "Be careful, gentlemen," he said. "The music remembers those who listen." Holmes gave no answer. His mind was already turning, as it always did, to the movements ahead. But I could not help reflecting upon Carraway's words, and in that reflection lay a deeper unease, that the drowned pianist's final measure had yet to be played. Chapter 9. The Conspiracy Unveiled. The morning after our descent into Camden Lock was unlike any other I had known in my years with Holmes. London awoke under a sky of iron, the clouds hanging heavy and low, and the fog from the canal still clung to the air as though reluctant to disperse. Holmes was already at his window when I rose, his sharp profile outlined against the gaslight. His expression was unreadable, though there was a certain satisfaction in his eyes. Our conversation from the previous night lingered in my mind. Holmes had insisted upon silence, saying only that the music must be buried before it can be heard. Yet I could not forget Carraway's warning, that the sonata was not merely art, but a dangerous power, one that might command minds as easily as a commander directs soldiers. Holmes broke our morning quiet with his usual decisiveness. "Watson, we are on the cusp of revelation. But revelation is not a gift freely given. It must be wrested from the dark." The phrase was typical of him, half cryptic, half command. I took my tea in silence, waiting for him to speak further. "Last night at Camden has changed everything," Holmes continued. We now know the sonata was designed for a purpose far beyond music. We know also that Sir Julius Harker was not acting alone. There is a network, a cabal within Whitehall, determined to harness this discovery. That network will stop at nothing to possess it. I set down my cup. Do you have proof of this, Holmes? He regarded me with steady certainty. Proof lies in the movements of our missing guest. Harker has vanished, not merely to protect himself, but to deliver the device to his masters. He is a courier, Watson, and we have but begun to uncover the trail. At that moment a knock came to our door. Mrs. Hudson ushered in Inspector Lestrade, his expression unusually grave. He carried a bundle of papers and looked as though he had been running against the wind. "Holmes," Lestrade began without preamble, "there's been another incident. Another body has been found, this time at the Thames near Lambeth Bridge." Holmes did not look surprised. "Proceed, Lestrade." The inspector spread the papers on the table. "Victim is a Mr. Edwin Calvert, a clerk of the Admiralty. Drowned like Linley, though with no marks of violence. He was found near low tide, as if he had walked willingly into the river." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "And what connection to our case?" Lestrade's frown deepened. Calvert was known to have been in communication with Sir Julius Harker. Witnesses saw them meeting in Pall Mall days before Linley's death. Calvert was carrying some papers relating to acoustic experiments. Holmes turned to me, voice low. "Watson, we are in the midst of a pattern, and it is not accidental. Linley, Calvert, both drowned under mysterious circumstances. Both men connected to Harker. This is no mere matter of artistic rivalry. This is a purge." He tapped the case containing the cylinder. "And the sonata is the prize." Carraway's words from Camden returned to my mind. "The music remembers those who listen." Holmes's gaze shifted to me with a rare seriousness. "We must understand what they intend before they complete their design." He summoned Lestrade to his side and spoke in rapid tones I could scarcely follow. When they had finished, the inspector departed, leaving Holmes and me alone once more. Holmes paced the room. "Watson, the conspiracy we face is broader than even Carraway suspected. Sir Julius Harker was a minister of the Crown, but he answered to others, men whose names are spoken only in whispers. They see in Linley's work not a musical composition, but a mechanism of control." I asked quietly, "Holmes, do you believe they have already tested it?" His reply was grim. "I do not doubt it. Linley's journals speak of tests at Camden, and Carraway confirmed as much. But the true scale of it is unknown. That is why Harker vanished with the device. They would not risk discovery." Holmes's hand fell upon the sealed box. "Watson, we must go deeper. Camden revealed only the chamber. It did not give us the whole design. Somewhere Harker and his masters have prepared the final performance." I looked at him in astonishment. "Performance? You mean to say this is intended as a public act?" Holmes's gaze was steady. "Not merely a performance, Watson, a demonstration, an experiment upon the mass mind. Think of it. One evening, the right sound played at the right place, and an entire crowd could be made to obey without question. That is the power they covet. And that, my friend, is why we must stop them." There was a knock again at our door, more insistent this time. Mrs. Hudson admitted a small, wiry man with a sharp gaze. He introduced himself as Mr. Oliver Renshaw, a journalist for the Times, who claimed to have evidence concerning the disappearances and the sonata. Holmes regarded him coolly. "Proceed." Renshaw produced a sheaf of letters and photographs. "Inspector Lestrade has been generous enough to allow me limited access. I have discovered correspondence between Harker and officials in Whitehall, letters that speak openly of the sonata's potential for public order. And more than that, a list of names of those who would attend a private performance." He passed the papers to Holmes, who scanned them with lightning speed, his brow knit. "So it begins. They intend to unveil it before the end of the week." Renshaw's voice dropped. "Holmes, I must warn you, there is more. One of their names is among the most powerful in government. They have the influence to make this disappear entirely if they choose. You are not merely opposing Harker. You are opposing the heart of the establishment." Holmes's lips curled in a faint smile. "That is precisely why I intend to act. He handed the papers back to Renshaw. "You will keep these close, Mr. Renshaw. Do not speak of them to anyone. Above all, do not approach Harker or Camden until you hear from me." Renshaw bowed and withdrew. When the door closed, Holmes turned to me. "Watson, the case has entered its final movement. We must locate Harker before the performance, intercept the sonata, and bring this conspiracy to light." I felt a chill at his words. "But Holmes, surely you see how dangerous this is, if we are wrong." Holmes fixed me with a gaze that was both reassuring and resolute. "We are not wrong. And that, Watson, is why we cannot hesitate. The music waits for no man." Outside the window the fog pressed closer still, as if drawn by the truth we now pursued. And I knew, with a certainty that gave me both dread and resolve, that the game was moving toward its decisive end. Holmes stood by the window, pipe in hand, eyes narrowing toward the London streets. Somewhere beyond that veil of fog, Sir Julius Harker still moved, carrying with him the dead man's music, and with it the power to alter the minds of men. Chapter 2. The Trap at Westminster. By the third evening following our descent into Camden Lock, London was wrapped in an uneasy hush. The fog, that ceaseless visitor to the streets of Baker Street, pressed thicker than ever, shrouding the city in shadow and uncertainty. Holmes had grown restless, pacing the sitting-room with measured steps, pipe in hand. His mind, I knew, was already moving toward the inevitable confrontation. "Watson," he said abruptly, without preamble, "we must act tonight. Every hour that passes gives them more time to prepare. The longer we wait, the less chance we have of preventing their design." I inclined my head. "And what is your plan, Holmes?" His eyes glistened with that rare, sharp light. "A trap, Watson. A demonstration that will lure Harker and his allies into the open. They think themselves the hunters, but tonight they will discover they are the prey." We spent the greater part of the afternoon in preparation. Holmes consulted Carroway once more, and together they examined the papers and sketches we had recovered. Lestrade, though not privy to the full detail, agreed to deploy certain constables at key locations in Westminster. By dusk, Holmes had arranged every detail. Our plan was simple in principle, yet intricate in execution. We would use the one thing certain to draw Harker into action, a copy of Linley's sonata, discreetly leaked to those in Whitehall. Carroway protested at the risk, but Holmes replied with a grim smile, "Risk is the currency of detection." When night fell, Holmes, Carroway, Lestrade, and I assembled in a discreet chamber beneath Westminster Hall. There Holmes revealed the final piece of his design, a replica of the cylinder, sealed and prepared as bait. The case was to be placed in plain sight during a staged public demonstration of the sonata, an invitation to those who sought to possess it. "Lestrade," Holmes said, "your officers will be stationed to surround the hall. We need no less than a cordon to ensure the quarry has nowhere to hide." The inspector nodded. "Understood." Holmes turned to me. "Watson, you will be my eyes inside the hall. Carroway will remain outside to assist the constables. Our quarry, I suspect, will be more than one man." I swallowed my unease. "Holmes, this is dangerous. What if they suspect the trap?" Holmes's gaze was fixed, steady. "Then, Watson, we have failed. But if we are right, they will come." The scene was set. Westminster Hall was transformed into a place of subtle intrigue, candlelit, hushed, with the air carrying the faint scent of wax and damp stone. The hour arrived, and I took my station in the gallery, concealed by shadow, my gaze fixed upon the hall below. There was a slow trickle of guests, men of influence, cloaked in whispers and purpose, some carrying letters, others listening intently to the music drifting faintly through the air. The demonstration was underway. A musician played the opening bars of Linley's sonata on a grand piano placed beneath the dais. The notes were strange and compelling. The air seemed to tremble with them. I could not say whether it was fear or fascination that held the audience. Holmes was beside me, silent, his eyes scanning every movement below. Carroway stood near the rear, his notebook in hand, whispering instructions to Lestrade's officers. The moment came without warning. A hush fell over the hall as the music reached its climax. At that instant, a figure moved through the shadows toward the pedestal where the cylinder was placed. It was Sir Julius Harker. His face was pale, his coat drawn tight about him. He glanced quickly toward the musicians, then advanced with a deliberate step, ignoring the curious gazes directed at him. Holmes's voice was low. There is our quarry." Harker reached the pedestal, his gloved hand touching the case. For a heartbeat he paused, as though the sound itself held him in thrall. Then without hesitation he bent to open it. That was the moment Holmes struck. From my vantage point I saw a sudden movement. Lestrade's officers closing in. A shout rang out. Harker turned, his face twisting with fury and terror. He drew a small revolver from his coat, firing blindly. Chaos erupted. The music stopped, and the hall descended into a clatter of footsteps and cries. Holmes sprang from the gallery and strode forward with a calm that was almost terrifying. "Mr. Harker," he called, "you are my prisoner." Harker's face was pale beneath the gaslight. "You do not know what you have done," he cried. "They will come. They will come for it all." Holmes's reply was quiet but firm. "They have already come, sir, and we have been waiting for them." The officers seized Harker, disarming him. I moved forward beside Holmes as Lestrade bound the prisoner. Holmes turned then, his gaze sweeping the chamber. The guests had begun to murmur again, some in shock, others in awe. Holmes addressed them in a calm voice. "Gentlemen, what you have witnessed is no ordinary crime. This is a conspiracy to harness the most subtle power of all, the power to command the will of men through music. That power lies within the cylinder you see here. It has been my task to ensure it never falls into the hands of those who would abuse it." A hush followed, broken only by the faint murmur of the crowd. Holmes's eyes met mine, and I understood that this was but the first revelation. The greater truth lay yet ahead, in the minds of those who would still seek the sonata, and in the shadows beyond Westminster Hall. Lestrade moved forward. "Holmes, what now?" Holmes placed his hand upon the sealed cylinder. "Now, my dear Lestrade, we secure it, and we prepare for what comes next, for I have no doubt that the conspiracy is far from ended. Harker was but a piece in a larger game." As the prisoner was led away, Holmes turned to me with a glance of rare solemnity. "Watson, the final movement approaches, and when it comes, we must be ready to hear it, for it will be unlike anything we have yet encountered." Outside, the fog curled around Westminster, swallowing sound and light. Somewhere within it, I knew, the music of Linley's sonata still waited, waiting for its final measure. Chapter 15. The Council of Shadows. The morning after Westminster Hall's tumult was unlike any I had known in my years beside Holmes. London awoke under a brooding sky, the fog clinging stubbornly to streets and alleyways. The clang of cab horses' hoofs sounded muted, as though the city itself had been subdued by some unseen hand. Holmes was already pacing the sitting-room when I rose, his gait slow and precise, pipe clenched between his teeth. There was a weight in the air, a sense that the events of the night past had opened a door to something darker. Holmes did not speak at breakfast, content instead to glance occasionally toward the sealed case in its place upon the table. His eyes, ever calculating, betrayed that the confrontation at Westminster had changed nothing except to sharpen the dangers ahead. It was Lestrade who broke the silence later that morning. The inspector arrived in haste, accompanied by Carroway and a messenger bearing a sealed dispatch. Holmes took the letter without ceremony, examined it under the lamplight, and then passed it to me. The envelope bore no mark but an elaborate crest I did not recognize, a crest that Holmes scrutinized with keen interest before returning the letter to its owner. "This," Holmes said softly, "is no ordinary communication. Lestrade, have you any notion from whence it comes?" The inspector shook his head. "All we know is it arrived without signature, and it carries a summons. It speaks of a meeting in secrecy, a council to be held within Whitehall this very night. Holmes leaned back, the pipe in his hand trembling only slightly. A council. The very phrase betrays their intent. They do not move in daylight. They prefer shadows. Carroway stepped forward. Mr. Holmes, the letter makes reference to Sir Julius Harker's name and the sonata. Whoever wrote this is aware of the events at Westminster. Holmes's gaze fixed sharply upon the inspector. That confirms it. The matter is far from closed. Harker was indeed a piece in a larger game, Watson, and we have been invited to the next movement of this design. I frowned. Holmes, do you intend to attend? Holmes did not answer at once. He stared into the fire as though weighing the gravity of the choice. Then he said quietly, I must, Watson. If there is a council in Whitehall concerning the sonata, then that is the seat of power behind this conspiracy. To know their aim is to know the game itself, and to know the game is to control its end. Lestrade frowned. But Holmes, that is dangerous. They will know you seek them. If they are prepared to drown men to conceal this secret, what will they do when confronted? Holmes gave him a thin smile. That, Lestrade, is precisely why we must go prepared. Watson, Carroway, I would have you both accompany me. Carroway hesitated. Mr. Holmes, you know what these men are capable of. They speak in shadows and act without mercy. They will not hesitate to silence those who come too close. Holmes's voice was steady. All the more reason to meet them in the open. We will enter their council not as supplicants, but as witnesses, and if necessary, as adversaries. That evening we made our way to Whitehall under the cover of darkness. Holmes was meticulous in his preparations, a disguise for Carroway and myself, arrangements with Lestrade for backup should matters turn violent, and a detailed plan for entry. The council was to meet within an ancient chamber beneath the Palace of Westminster, a place unknown to most of London's inhabitants. The letter's directions were precise. A narrow door beneath the old guardhouse, a password, and the assurance of discretion. Holmes approached the door with the calm of one who knows he walks into a trap, and yet who is determined to confront it. He spoke the password with an even voice. The door yielded with a whisper, and we stepped into a passage of stone that smelled of damp and secrecy. The chamber beyond was vast and dimly lit. A dozen figures stood clustered around a long table, their faces half hidden in shadow. The air was heavy with the scent of tobacco and authority. Holmes led us forward without hesitation, his presence commanding silence. One of the figures stepped forward. A man of great bearing, cloaked in deep black, his face hidden beneath a hood. His voice was soft but carried authority. Mr. Holmes, he said, we have been expecting you. Holmes inclined his head. Then you are aware that I have no cause to trust you. This gathering speaks of the sonata. I have come to learn its purpose and to question those who intend to wield it. A murmur rose among the figures. One of them, a woman whose voice was sharp and certain, spoke. The sonata is not merely a composition. It is a tool. It is a matter of the greatest urgency for the stability of the empire. Holmes's gaze did not falter. A tool that controls the minds of men is not a matter of art. It is a matter of dominion. And dominion, without oversight, is tyranny. The hooded man stepped forward. We do not act without consideration, Mr. Holmes, but there are forces beyond your understanding. The Crown has a duty to preserve order. This device offers a means to ensure it. Holmes's voice grew colder. Order bought with the silence of free will is a corruption, not a preservation. You speak of a peace that comes at the cost of liberty, and that is a peace not worth having. A tense silence followed. The council regarded him in quiet measure. Then the hooded man spoke again. You have made your position clear, Mr. Holmes, but know this. Those who hold the sonata will not relinquish it without cost. You have entered a war you cannot yet see in full. Holmes's eyes glinted. Then I shall bring light to the darkness. But I warn you, gentlemen and ladies of the council, the hour of revelation has come. A sudden movement drew our attention. At the far end of the chamber a door opened quietly, and a figure slipped inside. It was Harker. His face was pale, his steps unsteady. He did not speak, but his eyes met Holmes's with a mixture of fear and recognition. Holmes's voice was low and deliberate. "Sir Julius Harker, you have come to answer for your deeds." Harker's lips trembled. "They will not forgive me, Holmes. I have seen what the sonata can do. I cannot allow it to be played again." The chamber erupted in murmurs. The hooded man stepped forward, his voice sharp. "Enough. This is no place for argument. Mr. Holmes, you have seen enough to know that the sonata's fate will be decided tonight." Holmes looked about the chamber. "Then let us decide it here and now, for this matter cannot linger in shadow." The council was silent. Outside, the night pressed against the stones like a living thing, and I knew, with a certainty that sent a chill down my spine, that we were standing upon the threshold of the case's final act. For within this chamber, in that council of shadows, the measure of the drowned pianist was about to be revealed. Chapter 3. The Reckoning. The morning after Camden Lock was quieter than I had ever known Baker Street to be. Holmes sat at his window with the case sealed before him, his gaze fixed upon the fog that lay over London like a pale shroud. For once he spoke little, as though the night's work had drained his customary abundance of words. I, too, found myself heavy with thought. We had seen the sonata buried, silenced beneath stone and water, and yet the sense of unfinished business lingered. The case had not merely been one of murder, or of a mystery solved, but of a moral reckoning that stretched far beyond the Thames. It was Lestrade who broke the morning stillness, arriving with a bundle of reports and a worn expression. "Holmes, I've compiled what we have on the disappearances. Linley, Calvert, Harker. There are more names than we thought, gentlemen in service to the Crown, whose deaths or silence cannot be explained except by this affair. You were right. There is a network." Holmes's gaze did not leave the window. "The Council of Shadows was only the visible portion of their design, Lestrade. The rest moves in the dark, and we have struck at its heart." Lestrade looked doubtful. "Do you think they will stop now?" Holmes turned at last, his voice low and certain. "No. The music has been buried, but the desire for it remains. There will always be those who seek it, whether for art, for science, or for power." Carroway, who stood at the hearth, spoke with a weary gravity. "Holmes, you have destroyed the sonata. But what of those who survive the knowledge of it? Will they not reconstruct it?" Holmes gave a faint smile. "Let them try. They will find, Watson, that there is no measure but the measure we have silenced. This was the reckoning, and we have decided it." That evening, as the gaslight of Baker Street threw its pale glow across the sitting-room, Holmes summoned me to his side. He spoke of the case in a tone both reflective and grave. "Watson, in all my years of detection, there has been no case like this. The drowned pianist was not merely the victim of violence, but of an ambition that reaches beyond the grave. The sonata was his testament and his warning." I asked quietly, "And what of Harker? What fate awaits him?" Holmes's gaze lingered on the sealed case before him. "That is not for us to decide. Harker is in the hands of the law, and they will weigh his deeds accordingly. But I suspect he will find no peace, knowing what he has helped to bury." A knock came to the door. Mrs. Hudson entered with a letter, delivered by an unmarked messenger. Holmes opened it without ceremony. The letter was brief, written in a hand both certain and deliberate. "The measure is not ended. The music waits. Beware the silence." Holmes folded the paper slowly, his face unreadable. "Watson, this is the summons of a new game. The measure of the drowned pianist is not concluded. Somewhere beyond this moment, the music still calls." I could not disguise the unease that crept upon me. "Holmes, do you mean to say the sonata's danger persists?" Holmes's voice was steady, though edged with a rare melancholy. "It persists in the minds of men, and the minds of men are never still. The greatest measure of all is the one they will always wish to hear again." The days that followed were quiet, almost deceptive in their calm. Holmes returned to his experiments, to the case-books that lined Baker Street, and to his quiet study of human character. But I noticed that his attention was often drawn to the sealed case and to the letter that lay beside it. Lestrade reported no further incidents, though the shadow of the drowned pianist's case lingered in the corridors of power. Carroway departed soon after, returning to his own affairs with the solemnity of a man who has borne witness to something far greater than himself. And yet I could not shake the sense that the affair was unfinished. Holmes, too, seemed aware of it. There was a certain tension in his manner, a watchfulness that was not his custom. He spoke often of the next movement, as if prepared for a final note yet to come. One evening, as the fog rolled thick over London, Holmes spoke to me with the calm certainty that is his hallmark. "Watson, the truth is this. The Measure of the Drowned Pianist was never solely about music. It was about power, about temptation, about the choice between dominion and conscience. That choice is never settled once and for all. It is a reckoning that each man must face." I looked at him, my mind heavy with the echoes of our journey. "And what of us, Holmes? What is our reckoning?" Holmes's gaze softened, almost as if in answer to a question only he could hear. "Our reckoning, Watson, is to remain vigilant, to listen not merely to the music that is played, but to the silence that follows. For in that silence lies the true measure of the case." And so we sat in quiet that night, the gaslight flickering over the walls of 221B Baker Street, the sealed case lying between us like a sleeping instrument of fate. Outside, London moved on beneath the weight of its fog and shadow. Somewhere I knew the Measure of the Drowned Pianist was still playing, hidden, unheard, and waiting. Holmes did not speak again that evening. He merely sat by the window, pipe in hand, eyes fixed upon the mist that lay over the city, and I knew that his mind was already beyond this chamber, following the threads of a mystery whose last note had yet to sound. Thus closed the penultimate movement of our case, yet I was certain, as Holmes himself was certain, that the final measure was still to come. Chapter 14th. The Last Measure. The days after our meeting at Whitehall passed with a curious stillness, as though London itself were holding its breath. Baker Street was quieter than usual. Holmes devoted himself to his reading, and yet I observed that his attention was divided. His gaze often lingered upon the sealed case, upon the letter that bore the warning, "The measure is not ended. The music waits. Beware the silence." Holmes remained silent on the matter, but I knew, as I have known in all the great cases, that he was preparing for the final movement of our work. For Holmes, no mystery rests until the last note is sounded, and the last truth revealed. It was on the third evening after Camden Lock that the summons came. A discreet messenger delivered it, a folded sheet of parchment sealed with wax, bearing no mark but the same unfamiliar crest we had seen before. Holmes opened it without hesitation. The message was brief. "The music will be played. Tonight. You are invited to witness the last measure." Holmes's expression did not change, but his eyes, those piercing eyes of his, betrayed a rare intensity. He turned to me. "Watson, it appears the game is not yet over. Tonight we will hear the last movement and see whether the measure is to end in silence, or in the music itself." He summoned Lestrade and Carroway, and together we prepared. Holmes instructed that we meet at a discreet location in Westminster, near the ancient hall where the conspiracy had first taken shape. The hour was late, and the fog outside was a thick curtain, muffling the sounds of the city. When we arrived, the place was already filled with figures who moved in careful concealment. They were men and women of influence, of subtle power, gathered as though to witness some ritual. Holmes, Carroway, Lestrade, and I took our place among them. A hush fell as a figure emerged from the shadowed end of the chamber. It was Sir Julius Harker. His face pale, his steps slow and deliberate. He carried with him the cylinder, the sealed case we had thought buried forever. Holmes's eyes fixed upon it with a rare intensity. Harker spoke, his voice trembling. "Gentlemen, and ladies of consequence, the hour has come. The measure must be played." Holmes stepped forward. "Sir Julius, before you do, I must speak for those who stand in the light. This sonata is no work of art. It is a weapon, a force that bends the will of man. Its measure is not yours to sound. Harker's face twisted in anguish. You cannot know. I have heard it. It is beyond music. It speaks to the soul, and I am bound to see it played. Holmes's voice was firm. And I am bound to stop it. There was a tense stillness. Then the music began. The first notes rose softly, trembling like the breath of something half forgotten. It was unlike any music I had ever heard, haunting, terrible, as if the sound itself were shaping thought. I felt it deep within my mind, a tug upon my will, a quiet command that was both irresistible and abhorrent. Holmes did not seem affected. His hand moved to the case, and with deliberate care he drew from his coat a small instrument, a device he had fashioned in secrecy. "Watson," he said quietly, "this is the countermeasure. The measure must be silenced." He placed the device against the cylinder. The sound faltered as though struck by a hand unseen. The notes became dissonant, breaking into a silence that was at once sudden and absolute. The chamber was still. No breath was drawn. Even Harker staggered, as if the music had been torn from him. Holmes turned to the counsel. "The measure is ended. The sonata lies silent, sealed not by stone or water, but by will and reason. Let it remain so." There was a pause. Then Lord Carroway stepped forward. "Holmes, you have acted beyond our counsel, and yet you have done what was necessary. We will see that this case is closed." Holmes inclined his head. "That is all I ask. Let the measure of the drowned pianist rest, and let us remember that some music is too dangerous to be played." Harker's eyes met Holmes's. "And what of the silence? Will it last?" Holmes's reply was quiet but certain. "Silence endures only when it is chosen. We have chosen it tonight." Outside, the fog pressed close against the chamber, as though shielding it from the world. The council dispersed in silence, and Holmes, Carroway, Lestrade, and I departed into the night. We walked through the streets of London, the gaslight burning pale against the mist. I looked at Holmes, searching for the expression that might tell me how he regarded the measure we had ended. But he was silent, his mind clearly still upon the case. At Baker Street, Holmes finally spoke. "Watson, in all my career there has been no case like this. It was not merely the unraveling of a mystery, but the weighing of a moral measure. We have heard the last movement, and the silence that follows will be our answer." I nodded slowly. "And the sonata?" Holmes placed his hand upon the sealed case. "The sonata is buried, Watson. Buried with all who would wield it. Its measure is ended. But the memory of it remains, and that memory is a warning." I understood then that Holmes's words were not simply the end of a case, but a summation of a truth greater than any we had encountered. In the quiet of 221B Baker Street, with the fog pressing against the window and the city breathing softly beyond, I took up my pen to record this account. For the case of the drowned pianist was not merely a mystery solved. It was a testament to the danger of knowledge, the cost of power, and the measure of a man's conscience. Holmes, seated by the fire, pipe in hand, spoke at last. "Watson, every mystery is composed of movements. This one has found its end. But remember, there are other measures yet unheard, and other pianists who may yet play." The night deepened about us. Outside, London slept under its veil of fog, and somewhere, I knew not where, the silence held a measure of its own. Thus closed the last movement of our case. The sonata was ended, but the music waited still,